Wyoming Territory, August 1873. The wind kicked dust across the main street of Ten Sleep as the cowboy reined in his horse, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He had not planned to stop, just water the mare and ride on, but then he saw her. She stood outside the general store, holding a baby close to her chest, the little one wrapped in a worn blue shawl. Her hair was pulled back in a messy braid, and her dress was simple, hem-dusty. But her eyes, God, her eyes were sharp and scared and trying hard not to show it. The cowboy's heart gave a hard, strange thump. He dismounted slow, his boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. He could not seem to look away from her. Something about the way she cradled that baby like she was all alone in the world but still standing firm hit him square in the chest. She turned slightly, caught his stare, then looked away. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She nodded, cautious. "Afternoon." The baby stirred, fussing a little. She bounced him gently, whispering something too soft to hear. The cowboy stepped closer, not sure what he meant to say until the words left his mouth. "I'm not trying to bother you. Just your boy's handsome." Her eyes softened, just a touch. "His name's Daniel. I'm Luke Vaughn." She hesitated. "Aveline Mercer." There was a silence between them. Not awkward, just quiet. Luke glanced toward the store behind her. "You waiting on someone?" "No," she said, voice low. "Just trying to figure out how much cornmeal I can buy without running out of money." Luke nodded. He understood that kind of math. A man stepped out of the saloon across the street, half drunk and too loud. Aveline flinched, and Luke's eyes cut sharp toward the man. But the drunk wandered off, muttering. Luke looked back at her. "You out here alone?" She hesitated, then gave a careful nod. "My husband died last winter. Pneumonia. We were outside of Cheyenne. I buried him under a cottonwood tree." Luke's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I had to keep moving. Daniel was just 4 months old then. I couldn't stay." He glanced at the baby. "You have anyone now? Family?" "No one left," she said, voice flat. "I was raised in a church orphanage back east. Married the first man who offered me something else." Luke looked at her, really looked. She was young, maybe 23, but her eyes were older, worn down. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "I do not know yet. Just somewhere safe." Luke nodded, slow. "This town's small, but it ain't the worst." She looked up at him. "Not being the worst ain't much." "No," he said, "but it is something." The baby fussed again. Luke saw how tired she was, how her arms sagged a little holding the boy. She looked like she had not slept in more than a week. "You staying anywhere?" "There's a room above the livery. I'm paying by the day." Luke thought of the empty bunkhouse on his land outside town. He had not offered it to anyone in years. "If you need to rest a while, I have a place," he said. "About 6 miles out. Got a roof, water, quiet. I live alone." Her eyes narrowed. "You offering that to be kind? Or because you expect something?" He met her gaze. "Just kind." She studied him for a long moment, then surprised him by saying, "Let me think about it." He nodded. "All right." That night, she did not show. Luke sat by his fire, the mare grazing nearby, and stared into the flames longer than usual. But the next morning, just after sunup, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on the dry grass. He stepped outside and saw her walking up the path, baby in her arms, a small bundle tied to her back. She stopped a few feet from him. "I thought about it." He waited. "I do not have much, but I will trade work for a roof." Luke nodded, chest tight. "You do not have to trade anything. You are welcome." She looked away. "I am not good at taking charity. It is not charity if both people need something." She looked up at him, eyes cautious. "What do you need?" He hesitated. A reason to come home. She blinked, clearly not expecting that. But she did not run. He led her inside, showed her the small room at the back of the house. It was plain but clean. Aveline set the baby down on the bed, and Daniel immediately curled his tiny fists and kicked once, then slept. Luke stood awkwardly at the door. "I'll be outside. Let you rest." Later, when the sun was higher, she joined him at the fence, watching him fix a post. She handed him nails without being asked. He noticed how her hands moved, careful, deliberate, steady. "Did you ever live outside of town before?" he asked. "No, but I learned fast." He believed her. For days they did not talk much. She cooked. He worked. Sometimes she helped him in the barn, baby tucked in a sling across her chest. At night, she sat on the porch with Daniel asleep in her lap, and Luke would sit beside her. They listened to the wind and the coyotes and never said much. But it grew easier. One night, after fixing the roof together, they sat watching the sun go down. "You lost someone too," she said quietly. Luke blinked. "Yeah." "Who?" "My brother," he said. "War took him. Then my folks gave up after that. I have been alone since I was 17. Aveline nodded. "We are both ghosts." Luke looked over. "Maybe. But I have not felt like one since you came." She met his eyes. "Me either." Daniel stirred, and she cradled him close. Luke watched her hold that baby, so gently but with the kind of strength that made him ache inside. And for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. He did not say anything out loud, but in that quiet moment, watching her with her child, Luke Vaughn knew. He had found his forever. Luke watered the mare at the stream that trickled past the cottonwoods, his shirt damp with sweat from cutting fence line. August had turned the grass brittle, and the sun pressed hard, but the quiet out here felt like shelter. When he returned to the house, Aveline was outside behind the cabin, crouched low in the garden bed she'd started 4 days earlier beside the shed. She didn't look up as he approached, her fingers working through the dry soil, pulling at roots. "You're planting something that won't grow till next spring," he said. "I know," she replied, brushing dirt from her palm. "But the ground needs to be ready." Luke crouched beside her, watching the way she pressed her thumb into the earth like she meant to stay. "You always plan that far ahead?" "I never used to," she said. "Now I do." Daniel was asleep in a cradle she'd made herself from a split barrel, lined with a quilt she'd sewn from scraps Luke didn't remember owning. He watched the baby's chest rise and fall, steady as breath in a church. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" he asked. She sat back on her heels, squinting at the sky. "Sometimes, but I've never known where else to go." Luke leaned into the shade of the shed, arms folded. "Montana's colder, Nebraska's flatter, Colorado's filling up fast." She smiled faintly. "So here's as good as anywhere." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. That evening, Aveline didn't come to the porch. Luke found her inside, bent over a tin basin beside the stove, washing Daniel's cloths. She didn't hear him at first, her hair falling loose across her cheek as she scrubbed. Her sleeves were rolled high, one wrist showing an old scar, narrow and pale across the bone. He stepped into the room slow. "You want me to take a turn?" She looked back at him, surprised. "You ever washed baby linens before?" "No," he said, "but I've fixed a saddle in a snowstorm. Can't be harder than that." She laughed, low in her throat, then passed him one of the wet cloths. He took it without another word, rinsed it in clean water, and hung it on the line strung between the window and the stovepipe. "Did you ever think you'd end up doing this?" she asked. "Not once." "Do you mind?" Luke shook his head. "Feels better than drinking alone." She dipped another cloth in the basin. He knew how to clean fish, my husband. But he couldn't boil water without burning something. Luke didn't ask if she missed him. He already knew the answer lay in the way she kept her back straight and never let Daniel cry longer than a breath. After the wash was done, she fed the baby by the stove while Luke swept the dirt floor in silence. When Daniel drifted off, she wrapped him up and laid him on the cot in the back room. Then she came back out and leaned against the edge of the table, arms crossed, eyes on him. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what comes next." Luke rested the broom against the doorframe. "Tell me. I don't want to live off your kindness without giving back more. I can sew. I can mend. I can help with any stock once you get more than that old mare. I've got plans to buy 2 colts from a widow out near KC. Her husband died last spring. She's selling cheap." Aveline nodded. "I'll help train them. You ever break a horse?" "No," she said. "But I've seen a man break one wrong. I wouldn't do that." Luke poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "You're not what I expected. No one ever is." He watched her drink, her throat moving slow and sure. Her hands had a steadiness that came from years of doing what needed doing, not just what was asked. "I'll build a pen behind the barn," he said. "We'll need it come October." Her brows lifted. "You mean for pigs?" "For chickens first. Then pigs." She looked out the window. "We'll need boards. I'll take the wagon to town before Sunday." She set the cup down, then looked at him without flinching. "You said you needed a reason to come home. You still feel that way?" Luke didn't look away. "More now than before." Her jaw shifted, just a little. "I never expected to settle. But I think I could." Luke stepped closer, not touching her. "Not yet." "With me?" She nodded once. He didn't kiss her. He didn't reach for her hand. He just stood there, heart beating steady as hoofbeats on dry earth, until she spoke again. "I want to plant more than carrots and beans. Then we will." He paused. "Together, if you want it." "I do." Daniel stirred in the next room, a tiny sound like wind in grass. She turned toward him, but not before Luke saw the change in her face, something unguarded, something beginning. He opened the door for her, and as she passed, her shoulder brushed his. Heat bloomed in his chest, not like fire, but like warmth that had been waiting too long to come back. He stood there a long while after, staring at the sky turning soft with dusk, and thought, this is how forever starts. Not with thunder, with quiet, with her. The first frost came early, dusting the edges of the high grass in silver and drawing the breath from the horses in pale clouds. Luke stood at the edge of the field just after sunrise, his coat buttoned high, watching Aveline carry a pail of warm water from the fire pit to the shed. Daniel was tied snug against her chest in a wool sling she had sewn from one of Luke's old blankets. The fabric now faded to soft gray. "You think it'll snow before the month turns?" she asked, setting the pail down with a quiet splash. He adjusted the strap of the feed sack over his shoulder. "Could. Ground's hard as iron already." She rubbed her arms. "I've never been through a winter where the wind doesn't let up. Out here it don't. You get used to it or you don't stay." Aveline crouched to check the latch on the chicken pen. "That's not exactly comforting." Luke dropped the sack inside the barn and leaned against the doorframe. "It's not meant to be. Just true." She stood, brushing her hands on her skirt, and looked toward the hills where the sun was pulling light over the ridge. "I've been thinking about building shutters for the windows. If the wind cuts through the cracks like last night, Daniel'll catch cold. I've got spare planks." He nodded toward the lean-to. "We can cut them to fit." "I want to help," she said. "I know." They worked side by side that afternoon, her sawing while Luke held the board steady. She didn't ask for direction, and he didn't offer any unless she paused. Her wrists were red from the chill, and her braid had come loose beneath her scarf. But she didn't stop until the last shutter was hung and the hinges tested. When they stepped inside, the house held the warmth better. Daniel was asleep in the cradle near the stove, his face pink from the heat and the wool cap she'd knit from leftover yarn she'd found in a box under the bed. Aveline poured water into the chipped basin and washed the sawdust from her hands. Her knuckles were split from the cold, and Luke noticed she rubbed at them like she wasn't used to the ache yet. "You're bleeding," he said. "It's nothing. You should wrap them. I've had worse and didn't." He reached into the cupboard, took down a strip of linen, and held it out. "Still, let me." She didn't move for a moment, but then she held out her hands, palms up. Luke dipped the cloth into warm water and wrapped her fingers one at a time, careful not to pull too tight. "You always do things like this yourself?" he asked. "There's never been anyone else who would." He looked up at her. "You don't have to anymore." She held his gaze. "You sure about that?" "I've never been more." She didn't pull her hands away when he finished. "You know, I used to think it was better not to expect anything from people. That way it didn't hurt when they left." "Didn't stop it from hurting, though." "No," she said. "It didn't." He stepped back, giving her space, and she folded the cloth neatly, setting it beside the basin like she needed to set something right. "I found something in the barn," she said after a pause. "Behind the grain sacks." "What was it?" "Your brother's old saddle. The one with the concho missing. I figured it was his since it's too small for you." Luke nodded once. "Yeah, that was his. I cleaned it off. Thought maybe when Daniel gets older, he might learn to ride with it." His throat tightened. "That'd be good." She busied herself with the kettle, not looking at him as she asked, "What was his name?" "Eli. Was he like you?" Luke sat at the table, resting his arms on the wood. He laughed more. "Took chances I wouldn't. He'd have liked you." She set 2 mugs down, steam rising from the tea. "I think I would have liked him, too." They didn't speak again for a while, just drank in silence as the fire cracked low behind them. That night, Luke stepped out to check the barn before bed. When he returned, he found Aveline sitting on the floor beside the cradle, Daniel's hand curled around her finger. She didn't notice him at first, and he watched her eyes, soft and far away, like she was seeing something only she could. "I was thinking," she said without turning, "about the way you said this house didn't feel like home until we came." He knelt beside her. "Yeah, I didn't believe it. Not then. But I do now." Luke rested his hand on the cradle's edge. "Because of Daniel?" "Because of you," she said. "Because of what we're building here." He didn't speak, just leaned his forehead gently against hers, and they sat there like that, breathing in the quiet, while the wind outside picked up again. But this time it didn't feel like it could reach them. By late October, the mornings came cloaked in fog, the kind that clung low to the earth and blurred the tree line until it looked like the land had forgotten where to end. Luke sat on the porch sharpening his draw knife, boots braced on the step, when he heard her behind him. "There's a man at the creek," Aveline said. "Horse is tied off near the bend. He hasn't moved much." Luke set the blade aside and stood. "Could be someone passing through." "He's wearing a soaked duster and watching the house." Daniel was on her hip, wrapped tighter than usual. Luke touched the rifle just inside the doorframe, nodded once, and started down the path behind the barn. The man stood in the reeds, one boot in the water, hat pulled low and face shadowed. He didn't flinch when Luke stepped into view. "You need something?" Luke asked, voice steady. The man shifted. "I'm looking for a woman. Name's Aveline Mercer. Heard she came this way." Luke's jaw tightened. "Why you looking?" "She's got something of mine." Luke didn't move. "She don't belong to anybody. She took supplies from my brother outside Cheyenne. Left without paying." He died 2 weeks later. I'm settling his debts. Luke stepped closer. You come to collect from a woman with a baby? I came to ask for what's owed. Luke studied him. The man's boots were cracked, saddle scuffed, beard weeks old. He looked more desperate than angry. You want coin, Luke said. Or goods? Luke nodded once. She's inside, but you'll speak with me first. Back at the cabin, Aveline stood in the doorway, Daniel quiet against her. Her face didn't change when she saw the man. You knew him? Luke asked. She shifted her weight. He was my husband's cousin. Took us in when my husband died. Let me sleep in the barn with the baby. I left him a sack of flour and a skillet. That's all I had. The man stepped forward. You left without a word. I buried my brother in frozen ground and found your shawl in the hay. I had to go, she said. He started locking the barn at night with us inside. Daniel got sick. I had no choice. Luke caught the man's eye. You still want something? The man looked between them, then back at the woods. No, I don't. He turned without another word and walked toward his horse. Aveline didn't speak until the hoofbeats faded. I thought he'd never find us. He won't again, Luke said. Not while I've got breath. She looked down at Daniel, then back up at him. You believe me? I do. That night, she boiled potatoes and turnip in broth, and Luke carved a set of handles for the kitchen drawers. It was the first time since spring he'd worked inside after dark. You ever think about building on? She asked, sitting across from him at the table. For what? She ran her thumb along the edge of her mug. If Daniel grows, he'll need his own room. And if we ever had another. Luke's hand stilled on the carving. You want more children? I didn't used to, but now maybe. He set the handle down, looked at her across the flicker of the lamp. I'd like that, if it's with you. She reached for his hand, rough with splinters and cold, and laced her fingers through his. I've never had a man ask me what I wanted, she said. You'll only ever have that here. Later, after Daniel was down and the fire low, she came to the edge of his bed, paused like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. He pulled the blanket back in answer. She climbed in beside him, her back warm against his chest, his arms settling over her middle. Neither of them spoke. The quiet was enough. In the morning, frost held to the windows, and when Luke opened the door, the first snow was falling in slow, drifting flakes. Aveline stepped up beside him, hair loose, shawl draped over her shoulders. We'll need more firewood. I'll cut it. She squinted out over the field. You ever think about planting apple trees? He glanced at her. You think we'll be here long enough for them to grow? I do. He smiled, slow and sure. Then we'll plant them come spring. And with her hand in his, and Daniel still sleeping safe in the room behind them, Luke knew that whatever came next, snow, wind, or years, they'd face it together. Not surviving, living, rooted as deep as anything he'd ever known. The 1st of March came with a soft thaw, the kind that turned the creek restless and pulled green from the branches in slow, steady breaths. The last snow still clung in the hollows under the trees, but the wind no longer bid it nudged. Luke stood by the west fence line, hammering a new rail into place where the old one had split. The sun rested low behind him, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine pitch. Aveline was a few yards off, kneeling at the edge of the pasture. Pressing seeds into the soil, she turned herself with a spade and quiet resolve. Daniel sat nearby on a blanket, chewing on a carved wooden horse Luke had shaped during a long winter evening. She turned her face toward him. I marked out space for tomatoes and cabbage. There's enough sun here come June. He tucked a nail between his teeth. You got a good eye for land. I had to guess before. Now I can afford to wait and watch. He stepped back from the rail and tested it with a firm tug. You want to build a root cellar? I do, if we're staying. He looked across the field, out toward the line of trees where the trail to 10 Sleep bent west. We are. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep with his hand curled around one of Aveline's fingers, they sat by the fire with cups of chicory and the lamp turned low. She was shaping thread through a patch of muslin, repairing a tear in Luke's work shirt. Do you miss the road? She asked, knotting the thread. I used to think I needed it, the riding, the moving, but it turns out I was just trying to outdistance something I couldn't name. She tied off the last stitch and handed him the shirt. And now, I don't feel like I'm running anymore. She leaned back in the chair, her eyes following the flicker of the flame. There was a time I thought I'd never stop flinching at the sound of boots on a porch. Luke didn't press her. He waited. I used to sleep with a belt knife under my pillow, she said. Even when I was pregnant. Even when there was no one around. You still have it? She nodded. You don't need it here. I know, but I still keep it in the drawer. Just so I remember I don't have to use it. He reached for her free hand, roughened by cold and work. You're safe now. I believe that, but I didn't expect safety to feel so quiet. He smiled, faint and true. It's the best kind. In April, they rode together into town for the first time, Daniel tucked between them in a sling across Aveline's chest. Folks glanced over as they passed. The blacksmith gave a nod, and the widow who ran the mercantile gave Aveline a folded bolt of cotton with no words exchanged. Aveline didn't pause, didn't shy. She held Daniel close and kept her back straight. On the way home, she leaned into Luke's shoulder, the wind pulling at her braid. I never told you, she said, but when I first walked up your path, I almost turned around twice. I know. I saw you stop near the gate. She looked over in surprise. Why didn't you say something? I figured if you needed to leave, you would. But if you stayed, well, I'd be lucky. She rested her head against his arm. You are. By late summer, the apple saplings they planted in May had taken root. The root cellar stood beneath the small hill behind the house, stacked with stone and packed tight with straw. The mare had foaled in June, and Daniel had taken his first steps in the barn, holding onto the feed trough with both hands and crying when he let go. One evening, after supper, Aveline lit a second lamp and pulled something from a drawer. It was a folded piece of paper, creased and worn. The ink faded. I found this in my husband's coat when I was packing to leave Cheyenne, she said. It's a land deed, 40 acres near Bear Creek. He never told me about it. Luke took the paper gently, scanning the lines. It's good land, but you never claimed it. I didn't want to go back, and now I don't need to. He handed it back to her. You sure? It's yours by law. I don't want it, she said. I'd rather stay where I'm known. She drew in a breath, slow and certain. I want to be your wife, Luke. He reached across the table, cupped her face in his calloused hand. You already are, he said, but I'll say the words if you want them. I do. So in September, beneath a cottonwood tree near the creek, with only the preacher from town and the widow from the mercantile to witness, they spoke their vows. Daniel clapped his hands when Luke kissed her, his laughter carrying down the slope like music. That night, Luke carried her across the threshold, though she protested. I've already lived here a year, she said, laughing against his chest. Not like this, he answered. The fire was already lit. The house smelled of sage and flower. Daniel slept in the next room, and outside, the wind was soft, threading through the trees like a lullaby. They sat together in the bed they now shared, her head resting against his chest, their hands tangled across her belly. I think I might be expecting, she whispered. He looked down at her, startled. You sure? Not yet. But I know my body. He didn't speak right away. He just held her tighter. I never thought I'd get to want things, she said. Not like this. Not with someone who listens. You get to want everything, he said. And you'll have it. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of dry grass and the promise of rain. Inside, the house held steady, and together they stayed,